and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First matter is adoption of the agenda. Everybody had a chance to review that?
I have.
All right, we have a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We have adopted our agenda. Next is review and approval of the February 18, 2025 minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All right, motion to approve the February 18, 2025 meeting minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation by Dr. Jeff Castle, Superintendent of the Waynesboro City Schools, and Dr. Ryan Barber, Assistant Superintendent of Waynesboro City Schools, on the Waynesboro City School System. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Castle.
And out for reference.
Thanks, sir.
There'll be a quiz later.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and talk a minute about the school system. Alice Sand asked a few months ago if we would come by and give you an update on the school system and some of the things that are going on. I thought probably you were interested specifically in enrollment, as I've reported that to the City Council, I believe in November of 2022, and at least once since, and through some reporting provided it, I believe, to this group or to some of the staff. So I'll start with that part. Dr. Barber is with me tonight. I'm happy to be here. We do have a few other things we wanted to talk about. My understanding is you've been hearing from some city departments, and while we're not technically a city department, we're certainly consider ourselves a part of the city and believe we're a very important part of the city. So our current enrollment and building capacity, I'll speak just a moment to this slide. We report official enrollment on September 30th and March 31st. So the first column is the current enrollment as of September 30th, 2024. Preferred class size, you can see at the bottom, we like to have 18 students in pre-K, no more, 20 in kindergarten through second at the primary grades, 22 in 3 through 5, and 22 students in 6 through 8. That's not a regulation or requirement. That's what we find to be an preferable class size. The maximum class size by law, with a few exceptions, are 20 in pre-K, 22 in primary, 25 in 3 through 8, and 25 in 6 through 8. So the second column is our preferred class size. If we take all of our classroom spaces and multiply that out, that would be the point that we begin to think we're beginning to become overcrowded or at capacity. And the maximum class size is when we are overcrowded or at capacity. So as you can see, there's pretty substantial capacity. Well, the next slide actually shows that. I'll make one last comment. I don't have 9 through 12 on here because 9 through 12 is so hard to assign a number to. You have some classes, an advanced placement physics class that may have 8 students in it because that's who wishes to enroll. On the other hand, you've got 9th grade English classes that everyone's taking, so you may, while we try to keep those below 25, you might have 27, 28 in that. Part of that has to do with the ability to staff and what electives are offered. Here's some historical data around enrollment, and you'll see our enrollment is getting back to where it was about 10 years ago. I don't have a good explanation or one that I could provide you any solid evidence of data of why we saw a dip in our enrollment. I can tell you in 2020, a part of that was students that did not return immediately to schools after COVID. Some students chose to stay home and do virtual learning. We're finding those students are coming back now, as well as we are seeing some growth in enrollment. Okay. I'll take an opportunity at this slide to point out to you, while here you'll see we have 4 elementary schools, a middle, a high, and a pre-K center, okay, with 3,000 students. If you think about the city of 23,000, what's the population of our city, right? With 3,000 students and 21,000 residents, that's 1 in 7 is a student. 1 in every 7 people is a student, right? So if you look around the room here, we would represent maybe 2 or 3 students. My point being, at 2,100 new residents, we would pick up 300 students. But these 300 students would be spread across all 7 buildings and all of the classrooms in those buildings. And so that gives us capacity to put a number of kids. I can't tell you the exact number of classrooms we have, but it's over 200. So the other thing I would point out is there's good capacity at Kate Collins, a lot of capacity there actually. That's one of our newest, that is the newest construction in the city. There was some renovation, but a lot of construction there about now 25 to 30 years ago, 2008 to 10, I believe. The 4 elementaries, it's easier to adjust capacity because you can adjust an attendance boundary and students can attend another building. We don't like to do that, and we're nowhere close to doing that, but you could. The high school is the one where we're the closest on being at capacity. That in the preschool center. Preschool is growing. Preschool is not mandatory, so we do have a waiting list there of some students because of space. So the 2 ends of the spectrum at preschool and at high school, and you'll hear more about the high school in a minute. Happy to answer questions at any time if you have them. Just a few things of interest about Waynesboro Public Schools. We are a pretty big business organization. We're the largest employer in the city with 570 full-time employees, enough part-time that would put us over 600 in total employees. We do have the 9 campuses, 7 I just mentioned. We operate Valley Academy. We're the physical agent for that, which is alternative school on the campus of Wilson Complex because that's a regional program, and they had the space, so we're the physical agent and operate. And we will be opening a recovery high school for students experiencing substance abuse. It's a small number of students, but ones who have a great need. That'll be a regional program also to open in August. We employ a number of drivers with 21 regular bus routes and 10 van routes every day. Van routes take our students to Charlottesville, Harrisonburg, Lexington, Stanton, to residential day placements that are more appropriate for those students at this point in their educational career. We're not able to offer what they need during the day at the building, but we work hard to transition them back. And some of those van routes are also picking up homeless students who have moved or are living outside the city, but by federal law should attend school and should as they transition back. We serve lots of meals to 3,000 students, breakfast and lunch. Many of our students in after-school programs get a snack at the end of the day. And we actually have some students, it's not a particularly large number, but some students enrolled in after-school program at Kate Collins and Waynesboro High School that have dinner before they go home in the evenings. We have 27 maintenance and custodial staff. 6 of those are maintenance department folks with a more specialized skill set that serve all of the schools in the division, including the central office. The others are building custodians that are assigned at the building level. Our overall budget is just over $60 million for the coming school year. This is the budget that was just approved for FY26. I guess I've gotten a little ahead of myself and maybe should have brought this year's budget because the city council has not yet approved this one, but the board has, and it is balanced, so we're hopeful. primarily our money is in an operating fund, and that's what supports all the things I just talked about and will in terms of facilities, transportation, nutrition, maintenance, and instruction. We do have some multi-year funds that are grants that carry that carry past June 30th, so more than one fiscal year. They're held in a different fund. Valley Academy is a separate fund because it's regional. Recovery High School also will be a separate fund. Textbook and school nutrition are funds. They're the other two funds that we're allowed by state law to have a balance on June 30th, because particularly with textbooks, we get textbooks money every year from the state and we contribute to that, but we don't adopt textbooks every year. And so that accumulates to, an adoption for reading might cost us $600,000. So that builds over time. I thought you might have an interest in this. I get some questions now about federal funding and state funding. What I really want you to see here is the percentage. The state does provide over half of our funding at 55%. The locality is second at about 37.79. Our federal funds account for about 5%, and then other local funds are funds we generate ourselves from things like, we do get Medicaid reimbursement. We file for that for our school nurses and physical therapists, speech therapists. We generate some funds through E-rate reimbursements. The rental on our cell phone tower that looks like a light pole and provides lighting for the tennis courts. So we generate about 1% of that revenue. Our expenditures, which again balance. The important part of this is the 58% salaries and 23% of benefits, which is 81.5%. Almost all school divisions operate somewhere between 80 and 84%. We're right in the middle of that. Few might operate at 78% of personnel being the cost. We're a very people-intensive business in what we do. We're about the teachers and the aides, the principals, and all the support staff that we have. And so the second point I would make about that, as salaries increase, your benefits increase generally because they're a percentage of retirement, FICA, Medicaid, all those things. The non-salary is very difficult to reduce. That's our utilities, replacing equipment, doing maintenance on our buildings, and we have very large buildings with very expensive HVAC systems when things break. It's all the utilities that we pay, electrical. It's fuel for our buses. And so when we have to reduce a budget, it comes out of salaries, or when we're unable to give raises, that's a salary thing. It's very difficult in these times to reduce non-salary. I was a finance director 20 years ago, or 25, when the Great Recession came, and we cut some non-salary. We've never got it back in there. So as one of my colleagues says this year, he's giving a 3% raise and turning on the lights. And that's kind of where it is. We got some additional state funds and some local funds, and we put that into compensation. A few key initiatives. Talk about what our purpose is. Even though we do lots of other things, it seems, during the day, it's really about educating our students. We are really focused right now on enhancing literacy. The term that's used by the professionals is the science of reading, and it's studying how students learn reading. The General Assembly passed last year a law called the Virginia Literacy Act that defines for us curriculum and teaching strategies, provided some funding for professional development to improve our teachers' understanding of reading, and to provide us with materials. Back in one of those first slides, you saw some one-time revenue. That was the Virginia Literacy Act, really empowering all students to read, write, and communicate more effectively. We worked very hard on that in kindergarten through third grade. We don't get all students to reading on grade level. Our goal is by third and certainly by fifth when they go to middle school. We don't get 100%, folks. I'll be the first to tell you. I think we have an attorney among us tonight. I had a friend that used to say if doctors and lawyers all had 100%, we wouldn't have jails or graveyards, right? So I'm not going to tell you we get 100% of everybody where we want them. It just doesn't happen. But we work hard to get out as many there as we can. Strengthening teacher clarity and curriculum alignment, being sure that our teachers understand what we expect to be teaching at each grade level so there aren't gaps. Some years ago, I think we might have taught the same thing at third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade, and I say we collectively as a state, maybe a country, and there were gaps in there. So we try to assure alignment so that we're reinforcing concepts each year and introducing new concepts as appropriate, being sure that our instructional practices are purposeful and cohesive. Chronic absenteeism became a federal indicator of school accountability sometime around 2015 or 16. It didn't concern us very much in Waynesboro and probably not much in Virginia, I think, because our attendance was good. After COVID, we have struggled with that. We're improving every year. Our elementaries looked good last year, are looking really good this year. Middle school's looking a lot better. High school's improved. We still got a little ways to go with our high school. Now, that'll improve every year as these students are accustomed to coming to school. But those students who did not come to school for a year and a half just had trouble returning and being there intentionally and productively, as hard as we worked at that. That's one that's somewhat out of our control. We try to have a safe and secure and fostering environment, but we can't go get everybody out of bed and get them to school in the morning, although we make a lot of trips out in the mornings and have some attendance liaisons that help with that. But that's really about family engagement. We do have a number of English language learners in our school system, and so we provide targeted strategies for those students. That's a growing number of multilingual students. Students who can start with us early in preschool, primary, or even elementary, coming from homes where English is not the spoken language, have a great advantage because they learn to read and write and communicate effectively along with all their peers. As we get students in middle and high school who are trying to learn the language, that's more challenging. We have over 400 English language learners at different levels. Some communicate quite fluently, some virtually not at all. I think we're now up to 14 languages, if that's right, Dr. Barber. 14 different languages spoken in the city that we're providing translation services for, and small group instruction to get these students on track. Specially designed instruction is tailored to the experience of students increasingly, and I think I hate to keep coming back to COVID, but COVID was a traumatic time that I think we're just going to have to recognize for a few more years anyway, maybe a lifetime in my case. But we have students with substantial mental health and social and emotional and behavioral needs. We also have students with learning disabilities and increasingly severe learning disabilities that require very specialized services. Those students would have an IEP, an individualized education plan. I think that again is at or exceeds about 400 of our students. We have another group of students with medical issues that have what are called 504 plans, and those 504 plans provide accommodations for students who have a diagnosed medical disability. The most common would be an attention deficit disorder or ADHD, hyperactivity disorder, but we do have students with other physical needs that have specialized instructional plans. and just enhancing our communication strategies. We appreciate being here tonight so that we can give the message to folks and try to give people complete and accurate information, as I'm sure you know because you sit at the dais. Getting complete and accurate information out to folks is sometimes more difficult than people realize. Again, talking just a little bit about our specific tailored programs. Shenandoah Valley Center for Advanced Learning, that encompasses Valley Career and Tech and Shenandoah Valley Governor's School. Underneath it, those two programs are at the Center for Advanced Learning. We used to refer to the two separately. About 3 years ago or 4, that is a regional program with Augusta County and Stanton. 3 or 4 years ago, we hired a new director of that center and put both programs under one roof, much like a high school over at Wayne. It's all on one campus and largely in one facility. There's a second building number 2, but not unlike most high schools. And we were running a governor's school in one part and a CTE in the other with different directors, and they didn't really, it was kind of a line drawn arbitrarily down the hall. Well, Waynesboro High School, we have lots of career and tech ed programs. We have academic programs and we have arts programs, and we've got one person in charge of the campus and the facility, and they all work together. That's really working out nicely for us. For example, the robotics team, the engineering classes in the Gov School part may do the engineering and design work, and then they go down and work with the machine shop and the welding shop to build the robot or the car or whatever it is they're building. And so they're working together just like we do every day in construction or in real life. We do have several alternative education and post-high school opportunities. We're required by federal law to offer programs for our students with special needs, with IEPs, through age 22. One of those is the post-high house over on Poplar. We bought the house that adjoins Waynesboro High School a few years ago, and that's referred to as the STEP Learning Lab. Those students come there each day, learn independent living skills like mowing the grass and doing laundry. For the first year or so they were there, they would write me a check every month for the rent, which really wasn't the rent, but it was the idea that they were paying rent. And then they go out into various places in the city to work, YMCA, Summit Square, some of those. We've mentioned Valley Academy. Valley Academy is our alternative school. Valley Academy is not just for students with behavior problems. Some of the students there just have a level of anxiety or stress that they are being in a building with 925 other students and another 125 adults, so 1,050 people, they just can't deal with it. They do just fine there with 35 other students in the building. Some teenage parents there, some attendance problems that they're able to work with better, and some discipline problems, discipline behavior issues. Career and Tech Ed at Waynesboro High School. When we began the first phase of the renovation at Waynesboro High School for the 30s and 50s, we did not have a place to transition. We would call it phasing, to phase students during the renovation of those parts of the building. I'm very proud of this. We were going to need 8 modular units, which we were going to have to do water and sewer and utilities, set those up. They were for about $45,000 a year to meet educational standards, and we were going to need them 2 to 3 years. So it was going to cost us a couple $1 million just for the modular units. And when you're done, somebody hooks to them and drives out of town with a truck. We were able to buy the News Virginian building for $660,000, put about $900,000 in it, and so for about $1.5 million, we've got a great facility there that's going to serve us for many, many years to come. We also didn't have a place to put 8 modular units, by the way, downtown on Main Street. So that worked out really nicely for us. City Council was helpful with doing that. In there, we have plumbing, electrical. We work with Blue Ridge to do some nursing, some EMT training. The EMT training actually and nursing take place in what was the old Window World. We also purchased that building at the same time for the same reason. And after we were able to complete all that renovation, we've utilized those now for CTE. In fact, I believe some of the fire and rescue folks from here in the city train there because we've gotten grants and have some really high level. That's kind of scary that I said that and they're going out right now, isn't it? That's weird. Really high tech mannequins there that they're able to train with. We partner with Blue Ridge, do heavy equipment training in the summer, a program where a student can come and get their forklift or some heavy equipment certifications with backhoes and that kind of thing. I believe that I know the city last year was very interested in that program because the students graduated with that certificate. They were going to have a job somewhere, and I think the city, I don't know that they hired, but they were watching closely who was in it and who was hired through that. We're not, let me be clear, we're not competing with Valley Career and Tech in these programs, plumbing, electrical, those EM2s. What we're trying to do is generate interest with students earlier in 10th, maybe even 9th, but 10th and 11th grade, then they can go there and do the year-long program. Where it used to be you got to about this time in 10th grade and you said, well, hey, Jeff, do you want to go to Valley Career and Tech and be an electrician? I'd say, sure. And I get over there in a month into it, I find out I don't want anything to do with it. And I didn't even know what's behind the wall plate cover, right, or what's behind the socket. So we give students 6-9 weeks introduction to all the different construction trades, and then they can make more informed decisions, or the others as well. We're seeing our enrollment increase in the CTE programs at Valley Career and Tech, and we think that's part of the reason, along with some of the other changes that were made. We do have lots of athletic programs. I'm sure you realize that. Maybe you don't realize how many. There's right now boys and girls soccer and boys and girls tennis and softball and baseball and track going on in the spring. Really creative and robust arts program with our band, choir, theater. Theater works with the Wayne Theater here on some plays and some productions, and a really strong visual arts program as well. We try to be good stewards of the city's money and funds, and so a quick history lesson. In the 90s, William Perry Elementary was built and Westwood was completely renovated, the late 90s, so that's now more than 25 to 30 years old. I mentioned Kate Collins, which was partially renovated, but significant new construction of 2 large classroom wings in the late 2008 to 11 or something like that. Our other elementary schools, Berkeley Glen and Winona, were built in the early 70s, 72 and 74, and it had nothing done to them. It was the original doors, original windows. Heating systems were pretty close to original, not completely. In fact, I was getting ready to sign a bid for $780,000 for windows at Berkeley Glen when we learned that we were going to get some of the COVID money to improve air quality, and we could use that for HVAC and doors and windows. So we were able we stopped that, waited a month or so. Long story short, over the last 5 years, we've been able to use our COVID funds, some state construction grant money that we got, some of our own funds when we shut down, when schools and everything else shut down in March of 2020, 5 years ago, last week. We had some savings at the end of the year because we didn't have as many utilities. We didn't pay for fuel. We didn't travel. We didn't do professional development. So we leveraged all those funds, and we're actually able to renovate, complete renovations with HVAC systems, windows, doors. We had to pull the ceilings to do all that, so new ceilings and new lighting at Berkeley Glen, Winona, and Wayne Hills. Now, Wayne Hills is a much older building going back to the 50s, had closed, opened. There had been some renovation there, but it's been completely renovated. The HVAC systems HVAC system at William Perry was also under bid at that time at about $450,000, as I remember, and we were able to delay that out long enough to use COVID money. And the HVAC system at Westwood was on its last legs at 25 years. At Kate Collins, we upgraded the phone and intercom systems. Also, the safety and security upgrades there. At the time it was renovated and redone, the safety and security in the intercom was not what we would expect to have today. And some HVAC there. Did some work on our athletic facilities, the press box specifically, lights at the softball field to make it equal with the baseball field, and some others. We spent almost $20 million, and that's cash. There's no debt service. My point in telling you this is all of those projects were on our 10-year capital improvement plan. And sometime in the next 10 years, presumably the city, because we don't have that kind of money, and the city takes care of the capital projects, was going to have to figure out how to do that 20 million or undertake debt service or come up with some solution, because you got to have heating and air, and it's nice when your doors and windows shut tightly and lock. So we feel like we wiped out basically the capital improvement plan for anything more than $500,000, with the exception of Waynesboro High School. And so really proud of that as we now talk about completion of Waynesboro High School's renovation and construction. I mentioned already there's a 30s and 50s edition. We've renovated that. If you've not been in, I think it's a very well done renovation. It's a very, very solid building. Things were built well in the 30s and 50s. The 70s, not so much so. We didn't have the building codes that we have now, and people weren't watching. Sometimes people get aggravated, I think, with building codes and inspections. There's a reason we have them. If you don't believe that, go over and look at their 70s wing. A lot of structural issues. We've had numerous firms look at it over the last 10 years, and they say, basically, you can fix anything, but it's going to cost more than it does to demo and build new, and you still got a 50-year-old building with structural issues. So our plan is to come in front of the existing wing, which is the wing closest to us. The other parts of the building have the auditorium, the gym, the offices, all that. The wing closest to us that we refer to as the 70s is strictly classrooms, including 1970 science labs, which still look like 1970 science labs. So we'll go in front of that and build a new classroom wing, because any point in the day there's 650 kids, 650 kids in that part of the building, and just don't have a place to put them. So we'll go toward the street and build a new classroom wing, demo that wing, and then immediately behind that, adjacent to the football field, but also opening up to the track and soccer field and tennis courts, a full-size gymnasium. Our gym was built in the 50s. It's actually 10 feet short of being regulation, but VHSL lets us use it because it's what we have. You can't extend it because of Poplar Avenue, the way it's built. And to have, I can't tell you of another high school in our area that doesn't have 2 gymnasiums. And many of those are 450, 500, 600 student schools. So the need for that gym in the winter, when we have girls and boys basketball and volleyball and wrestling and all the sports going on, cheerleading, and just for instruction during the day, it's really almost critical. So it will be a full-size gym, actually built with enough seating to host regional district and regional competitions, because we're in such an ideal location to do that with the confluence of the interstates. And some associated spaces like locker rooms and coaches' offices. We have hired, the city has appropriated $1 million to start the A&E work on that. The plan at this point is for a $60 million bond sale. We have engaged the services of an architect and engineering firm. We'll undertake construction management in that process, rather than the traditional design bid build, which we think serves us better for many reasons, and that's been confirmed by outside party. We have on the street now the proposal for the construction management firm. We actually did a statement of qualifications, had 9, narrowed it to 3, and we'll hope to make that decision in the next month. Already in some design work, but it will really pick up over the next year. Some point in the near future, there needs to be major renovation at Valley Career and Technical Center. The way that program works as a regional program is for the capital facility, which was built in the 1970s. Waynesboro has 25%, Stanton 25%, and Augusta County 50%. We did do $4 million there with some of the COVID money over the last 3 or 4 years to upgrade the original 50-year-old heating system that was in bad need, and added 3 science labs for the governor's school because there weren't any science labs at the Career and Tech Center. They were using converted body shops and welding shops. But that will be upcoming. There is money in the state budget for construction grants. We will apply for Waynesboro High School. I expect that Augusta County will apply for this, and so that might be helpful for both if they were to happen. But just putting that on the radar on like capital improvement. And then some other things on our capital improvement plan that I thought might be of interest to you, and really what it is Winona has only one entrance, and it's right at the Main Street and the railroad. You wouldn't build a school now with only one. In fact, I was assistant soup in my last job, and we built one that was in a very similar location with a railroad crossing and a road, and we spent $260,000 putting the second entrance out because we had to buy an easement and go through a rock pile basically to do that. They really need a second entrance and exit, not just for traffic flow and buses, but for safety. We lease a bus parking facility that is quite adequate down at the old Gencom plant, but we don't own it. And if that gets sold or something happens, I'm not sure. We went through a period when they were changing ownership that we moved buses. You might remember seeing them down at Constitution Park and other places around the city for about 4 months. And that didn't work out well. And we don't have a maintenance facility. We work out of a small little shop on Sycamore. Questions or comments? I hope I didn't take, it took longer than I meant to. Sorry about that. Questions?
Going back to your introduction into the trade, the electrical plumbing, I noticed you didn't have project management in there.
We don't have project management, and that is an excellent point because all of that's about tens of millions of dollars.
Because that is one area, and that happens to be my area of expertise. The people that get into construction, they don't never intend to stay at the trade level forever.
Right.
They want to move up the ladder. And if you offered an introduction to that, there is always people looking for excellent project managers and construction superintendents. I think it would benefit the students well to have that.
And that, I would tell you, one of the things we try to do, I talked about engineering and welding, but we try to do that at the high school with finance classes and independent living classes and students just understanding banking and business and loans. That could certainly, this would be a perfect example of going into the finance and the business world of it because, that's great opportunities in all of those.
Because that'll give them a background in financial responsibility too, managing a budget for a project. You already said that they're writing you a, quote, rent check every month,
Yeah.
but, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be balancing project budgets.
Sure. Well, just understanding a proposal and that you got to go out and bid. You don't just get the job. You got.
You're exactly right. Have y'all ever considered using the students at K-Tech to do some of your smaller renovations?
We have, there's a number of barriers there. One are some OSHA regulations that we would have to work around, and that's improving. There's been a focus on CTE, and we're finding that there's lessening of regulations to allow students to do internships and mentorships and apprenticeships. Second is the timing to get out and get back. But we do some of that, and I'll give you an example. We were talking about Wayne Hills, but we actually, you may remember the credit union for the city, the Waynesboro City Credit Union, for those of us that have been around for a decade, used to be over in 3 or 4 rooms at Wayne Hills Center. And there were a couple other rooms there near Public Works. Well, when the credit union moved out, we needed those as classrooms. So my maintenance guys could do most of the work, but I didn't really want them to have to demo it. So I called over and asked the construction trades guy at the Career and Tech Center if they'd want a demo job, and he got so excited. And they came and spent 2 weeks, I guess, because as you know, you demo it the right way, and it saves you work. You demo it the wrong way, you're in a mess. And he said, I never get to change the demo. We build new. Every year we build new, and they build a house and sell another. But he was so excited to have an opportunity to come out and demo something.
It's an art to what I call surgical.
Yep.
Just curious about how do y'all go about your salary? You talked about repairs and buying equipment and all that. How do y'all go about procuring y'all's equipment? Do y'all go through VASCUP in Richmond through the state, or?
Our finance department puts out bids, and they go at a certain level. They go through EVA, which is Electronic Virginia.
Yep.
We posted some bids today for a couple of small jobs, some services. We bid anything over $10,000. We bid.
Do y'all ever take advantage of the state contracts that they already have built?
We do, yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah. Particularly with some specialized things like Siemens Controls,
Yep.
Johnson Controls that does fire safety, some of those.
Very familiar with them.
Other questions?
Other council, when do you expect to open the doors on the new wing?
Of the new construction? Well, my plan, and I shouldn't say my plan, my understanding of the plan that we currently have with the city is that, as I said, we should have the construction management group on board within the next 30 days, 45. We'll start all the design work. We'll go to schematic design and then detailed design work, which should be complete by about January. It'll take most of the rest of this year to do that. By January, we would like to start submitting that. Department of Ed has some review, but most of it's the city. So we would start submitting that to the city for review and permitting, the stormwater, all that. In my schedule, I have through March to complete that. And then giving us a little buffer of April. We'll need to sell bonds. There's been some discussion about, so that's calendar year 26. Bond sales for Virginia Public Service Authority, VPSA bond sales, only happen in the spring, generally in late April or early June, and in the fall, in October or November. I would like to be able to do spring bond sale of April or May, because once we have the bond sale and have the money, we're ready to break ground, and we need to capture that summer. Having a summer without students in a building is so critical. It just changes the whole ball game, because you get 2 months to get in there and get things done. So that would be June of 2026, and I would think this is a 3-year construction project. Now, first thing's going to be the classroom addition, which is probably 1.5 to 2 years. Then we'll be able to open and start to utilize that, secure the area and demo. The demo is probably a summer job, I would think. And then the gym's probably the 3rd year.
Does the new wing increase your capacity at all?
Yes, it does. Capacity is currently 1,050, I believe, if that's what I had up there. And our capacity would go, I don't remember I don't know that we've calculated the number completely, Mr. Lee, because we haven't completely, we haven't finished the conceptual design in its entirety, but it does increase the capacity there.
Okay.
I better not give you a number because I don't know it exactly.
Thank you, sir.
If any of your senior students that are finishing up K-Tech this year are interested in apprenticeship program, UVA starts taking applications April the 1st for their 4-year apprentice program.
All right, I'll pass that on to them. I know some folks have done that. Yes, sir.
I know you don't want to give a number on the increase in capacity. You have any idea? I mean,
At one point, we talked about it being 1175, but I don't know that that's, I don't know that we'll be able to get there. A little bit of what complicates that is this wing will have science labs. Science labs are bigger and take up more space, and you still put 25 kids in them. So some adjustments there can change 25 or 50 students.
so that would increase it by about 100 students then, the capacity.
I believe it's a little more than 100 students. I think it would be more
Well,
like
105.
125, 150 maybe, but yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing, I mean, it's great to increase capacity, but how about the teacher shortage? How do you handle that?
Well, I'm going to give you the 5-minute version of about a 30-minute version that Mr. Stewart has heard at the school board. I came 12 years ago as superintendent, and just to be perfectly honest, the narrative was that you wanted to work in the county or Stanton because they paid better and had better benefits. We've worked really hard at that. I take no credit for that. I've got great people in human resource, and the city has supported that. And our pay scales are very competitive right now, and it's a good place to work, and we've got good benefits. I do take great pride in, Dr. Barber does most of the hiring. He's in charge of personnel. Principals will interview at the building, and then they'll come to him for a second interview. Just today, he interviewed a lady from the Norfolk area who has relatives in an adjoining division and said, well, they want me to come closer. And they said Waynesboro is a good place to work, and I ought to go there. We find our own employees are telling their college roommate or their cousin or their sister or their friend, come here and work. We're consistently hiring people from Albemarle and Charlottesville. And we just didn't used to do that. So the compensation and benefits, the work environment, and frankly, the city, I think that's why we're seeing residential growth. Our greenway, our parks, our infrastructure, the industry that's coming in. You know, we lose some teachers each year because I can think of 2 that I know of right now whose spouse has transferred in their job. So they're transferring because you can get a teaching job all over the country, right? Same thing happens here, though. As people come into work at Northrop Grumman or whoever, there'll be some spouses who are teachers that we think we're going to be able to hire. So I think it's a combination of just recruiting. We're in a better place than a lot of school divisions, and I can show you that. I don't want to sound like I'm standing here making statements that we can't back up, but I do think we have a good school system. You all know this. It's your job. You're not going to have a thriving, booming, productive city if you don't have a good school system. And we're not going to have a good school system if we don't have a thriving, progressive city that's supporting us and helping to fund that, which is why I talked about budget and programs and not just capacity tonight. So,
So you don't anticipate any big issues then?
we need to hire another math teacher or 2 and a couple of foreign language teachers, but so does every school division in the state. But by and large, we're in a pretty good place. I think it's going to get tough for all school divisions over the next couple or 3 years, and then maybe that'll come back around. I think I'm speculating a bit here, but I think during COVID, it was a tough time in public schools, and I think a lot of students who might have gone into teaching didn't do that. They left high school and did something else. We're seeing small numbers of college seniors now. When Dr. Barber goes to recruiting fairs and job fairs, in fact, I was in a regional superintendent's meeting today in Charlottesville. It was just very small numbers coming out. We are finding, and we're lucky to participate in some programs one with Virginia Commonwealth out of Richmond that we were able to partner with some school divisions out of Eastern Virginia, and we're happy to do that. For career switchers, people who want to become licensed teachers and teach, and we find some very good teachers there. We get the occasional one that's not a good idea, and we just have to tell them that. But I think we'll see increasingly programs for career switchers or our instructional assistants. Many of our aides have an associate's degree, and there are programs where we can assist them in their tuition and their experience in the building where they're working already to get a bachelor's and get a teaching license. Would you add anything to that, Dr. Barber? That's your area of expertise.
People are coming from all over the country to this area. I met with some folks recently from Charleston, South Carolina, a very beautiful part of our country, and they came to vacation in this area and fell in love with it. And they're two of our best teachers, and they're living here in our community. One of the things that is not part of Dr. Castle's presentation, but I would really like us to be able to do as a community, is to purchase a apartment complex or a number of houses and provide subsidies for police, fire, and teachers who live in the city of Waynesboro. Because one of the things that we do find is if you move from Charleston, South Carolina, you probably are doing okay because you were able to sell your home there and at a pretty high rate and come here to the community and buy something very comparable. But if you are a brand new teacher and you haven't received that paycheck, it is really, really hard to pay rent. And to find a place that has rent that is within your budget. So I think that would be kind of how I would hope the community can maybe level up. And some of our colleagues around the state are doing that kind of work. But we're finding really great folks who are coming here because of the community that you all are helping to build.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Castle.
Thank you, Doc.
All right. Next on the agenda, we have public hearing for amendments to City Code Chapter 98, the zoning ordinance, Article 4.4.10, vehicle sales and service, Article 4.7.6, car washes regarding the change in the orientation requirement for service bay doors.
Okay, good evening. So this is a zoning text amendment for section 98-4.6.7 car washes, and then in addition to section 98-4.4.10, which is our vehicle sales and service section. So the applicant has requested an amendment to section 98-4.6.7 car washes, and the amendment requested by the applicant, which specifically addressed how bay doors associated with those car washes are oriented within the city's entrance corridors, and then also to adjacent residential areas. The applicant is working with a potential car wash client or car wash tenant for a site at the Waynesboro Marketplace. And right now, as the ordinance is written, it wouldn't permit the placement of the car wash because of the orientation requirements for the bay doors that our ordinance currently has. Because this amendment would affect not only this property, but also properties citywide within the entrance corridors and then any residential areas, we do need to take a look at this and how a potential change would impact citywide, which is why staff added in section 98-4.4.10, which is the vehicle sales and service, because that section addresses bay doors as well, and in fact contains the exact same language. So staff feels that keeping both of those sections consistent would avoid any confusion and just ensure that there's consistency in application. So the current ordinances read, and the pertinent section is bulleted in red, is all service bay doors openings shall face away from adjacent residential uses and from corridors designated in section 98-3.3.2.b, which is refers to our corridor overlay district. It is the exact same sentence in both the car wash section and the vehicle sales and service. And this sketch comes from our zoning ordinance, and it shows you have your road right here, and then the orientation of the bay doors are parallel to the road rather than facing the road right there. Let's give a quick look at our entrance corridors. They are sort of the main routes through the city. You have the Main Street corridor, Broad Street, Delphine Avenue, Rosser, the I-64 corridor, and also Ivy Street, north of Hopeman Parkway, heading out of the city. So the current ordinance does require those bay doors to face away from those entrance corridors that I just showed and residential districts. Staff believes that the intention of the ordinance as it was written was to protect the viewshed quality of those entrance corridors and then also any negative impacts from the residential areas that may be adjacent. But we also believe that it has led to mixed results in application, and I'll go through several examples here in a moment. And so this amendment looks to more consistently reduce that potentially negative visual impact those bay doors may have on the entrance corridors, but then also on those adjacent residential uses. So this is the proposed amendment language. It is the exact same sentence or several sentences both in the car wash section and the vehicle sales and service section, and it states that the orientation of bay doors openings shall face the direction having the least visual impact on residential uses and corridors designated in section 98-3.3.2.b. The site review team shall make final decision determining the orientation. Additional screening deemed necessary by the zoning administrator to protect views from adjacent properties may be required. So staff's intent with this proposed language is sort of in the first sentence, it allows the developer to determine the best placement of their particular development, their building, based on what might work best on that particular site, taking into account that they need to try and mitigate any negative visual impacts. That second sentence, the site review team, that review team is assigned to assist the zoning administrator in site development review, so reviewing those plans, and it consists of staff from various departments. You got planning, zoning, building, fire and rescue, public works, engineering. So you have all those departments involved in those review processes. So they would help make that final determination about how that building would be oriented to mitigate. And then finally, that last sentence, the additional screening, that gives the zoning administrator the flexibility to provide require additional screening on top of what might already be required. For example, if a use is requiring a 15-foot Class B buffer, and that's just required between the use and the residential areas, then an additional screening such as a fence to further mitigate those impacts could then be required through this ordinance. So you'd have the fence, and then you'd have that 15-foot buffer that would just help mitigate those impacts, especially for residential areas. So now I'd like to walk through a couple examples throughout the city. Excuse me. A couple of these are newer builds, and some of these are existing structures that have been here for quite a while. The first one that I'd like to talk about is that Take 5. This is actually at the Waynesboro Marketplace on Rosser. It's located right here. And then in this photo right here is you're traveling south and north on Rosser Avenue. And this particular structure had to follow those orientation requirements. So you have the bay doors facing away from the entrance corridor, Rosser Avenue, and you have the plain wall side of the building facing the roadway. This orientation in this particular circumstance gives you a very clear view of those 3 bay doors as you drive the length of Rosser as soon as that building comes into view. In staff's opinion, the building, had it been able to orient the other direction, have those bay doors actually face Rosser Avenue instead of running parallel with Rosser Avenue, would actually detract your attention from those bay doors, because they would be, I guess, better shielded as you're approaching, and then they would come into view as you're sort of near it and then passing it, as opposed to being able to see it the entire length of the corridor. So in this case, it would have been better to orient it the other direction. Second example that we have here is the tidal wave, also a new structure, basically right across the street from the Take 5. In this situation, it is a car wash. It does have that 1 bay door as you're heading north on Rosser Avenue. The other side doesn't have a bay door. It's a big glass window, and it's actually pretty well screened by the 2 existing trees, and then traffic light paraphernalia and signage. So you really can't tell it as you're, really can't see it well as you're heading south, but if you're heading north, you do see the bay door, but its impacts are mitigated by several factors in this particular case. One is that does have these mature trees that were left standing next to the roadway. Also, the building materials and the architectural design created a much more pleasing building. It's much more pleasing to the eye. It's got those big bright windows. So sort of the design of the building and the construction of the building itself helps mitigate the impacts that seeing the bay door as you drive parallel with Rosser gives you. Third example we have is a Discount Tire. This is over at Town Center. And here again, you have the bay doors that are running parallel with the entrance corridors. This is P. Buckley Moss Drive. But here again, they aren't as noticeable as, for example, the Take 5. Again, the site here has helped determine that. The Discount Tire is set below the elevation of the road, which sort of lowers the view of the doors as you're traveling past. And in this case, there is some vegetation that's had a chance to mature a little bit, so which further helps mitigate that impact. So here, the fact that the Discount Tire sits below the elevation of the road, plus some more mature vegetation, the combination of the two help mitigate the impact of those bay doors a little bit in this case. It's also only on one side in this case. As you're traveling southbound on P. Buckley, you don't actually have those bay doors. Next example is the Right Way Hyundai. This building is quite old at this point, but they do have a line of bay doors along sort of the back part of the property. This is heading towards Stanton on West Main, and then this is heading into downtown Waynesboro on West Main. So here again, there are a couple reasons why these don't feel quite as noticeable as some of the others. You have some mature trees that have helped shield it. You also have very expansive parking lots with vehicles, so you can't see them quite as well in this case. But here again, you do see those bay doors as you're traveling the corridor. And then finally, the last example is the Mr. Tire, also on West Main Street. This is actually currently a legally non-conforming use. This building predated the current zoning ordinance requirements. So you can see that their bay doors are actually facing West Main, which gives us a good example of what it would look like if that building was oriented so that the bay doors were facing the road as opposed to facing the traveling public as you're going down the road. And here, you do not have as much emphasis placed on those bay doors. You have that solid wall there as you approach, and you see them, but they're not sort of staring at you. And here also you lack some of that mature vegetation. So that seeing the side of the building as you approach as opposed to the bay doors sort of helps mitigate the visual impacts in this case. So all of those previous examples help illustrate that the visual impacts that the bay doors have vary from site to site. And they depend on a number of factors that include each site's individual characteristics, the building materials that are chosen, the architectural design that is chosen, and any vegetation, including any existing vegetation that is left that's mature, and any vegetation that will be required after construction is complete. And being able to determine the building orientation on a site-by-site basis allows both the developer and also staff to take all these considerations into account when figuring out how to best orient that building, and then also protect the adjacent views from any residential areas that could be impacted, and then also on those entrance corridors. It also provides the zoning administrator the ability to require additional screening deemed necessary to protect any adjacent residential uses or entrance corridors, and that would be on top of what might already be required by our zoning ordinance. So again, class 15 or 15-foot class P buffer might be required by the ordinance, but then the zoning administrator could also require additional screening on top of that. And so the current ordinance's goal, the way it is written now, with the bay doors facing away from the entrance corridors and residential areas, it was designed to help ensure a visually appealing corridor, but staff does feel that this has yielded mixed results. And being able to determine the orientation on a site-by-site basis would you'd be better able to reduce the visual impacts that those bay doors may have if you have the ability to do that. But then also, if we are seeking to create visually appealing or aesthetically appealing entrance corridors, creating and implementing design standards could be a better approach to accomplishing that than this particular requirement. And staff is therefore recommending approval. The applicant is here tonight to answer any questions you may have, but I'm also happy to take any questions.
I have a couple of quick questions, which is probably going to reveal my total ignorance about commercial development. But the one potential issue or concern that I have about potentially these sites facing the roadway, with bay doors facing the roadway, is the potential for unimpeded traffic from the bay door, siting the bay door very close to the roadway, and the potential for traffic that interferes with the roadway, like, okay, it's time to pull this car from bay 1 to bay 3, and they enter the roadway and interfere with traffic flow. Is in the site evaluation process that you have explained to us with the site review team, do you have the ability to prevent that? Is there a requirement with either setbacks or traffic flow that would prevent that? And I think in a place that I used to live that I won't name, one of the big traffic issues in the neighborhood was one of these, grandfathered in shops where every 30 minutes when you're trying to turn out of the road, there was a car blocking that was being pulled from one place to the next or moved out of the bay to go wait for somebody to pick it up. That would be the traffic flow sort of component of all this is the one potential issue that I didn't see addressed in the presentation that I just wanted to ask you about.
Yes, so the factors such as setbacks would help determine that, so they can required to site the building a certain setback away from the front property line, so that would help mitigate it. Also, the site review team does take a look at traffic safety issues as they're reviewing, so that should be addressed during that site review process.
So that concern would be addressed in due course as part of the site review?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Since we are focused so significantly on sort of the visual part of this, I just want to make sure we address the traffic.
Yes.
Anybody else have questions for staff? Sorry, I jumped right in.
So, the current text essentially automatically protects residential. If there's residential, then under the current text, you can't have those bay doors face that position. And the new text would take that out, and we would rely on the site review team to make that determination. That concerns me.
I think one thing that we've talked about also is, so the orientation of the bay doors, the visual orientation is one mitigating factor. So certainly your point is well taken that this would, take that outright elimination away, that yes, they could face residential. But I think it's important to also point out that there are strict requirements for buffering between a commercial use and a residential use. And so that buffer would be in place, but then also with this language, any additional buffer that the zoning administrator and site review team felt was important. So I think in some ways, staff felt like that the visual orientation of the doors is one thing, but even if you were to turn it, or it was required to be turned and be in compliance with this existing ordinance, then there would only be a certain buffer that's required now, but maybe not an additional buffer that could help with the lighting aspect or the noise aspect, rather than maybe potentially just the turning of the bay door. So I don't know if I explained that well, but that was, as staff was looking at it, felt like there would be ways, certainly there might be some sites where they couldn't turn it any way because it would either face a residential or it would face an entrance corridor. But in those instances, the site review team would be looking at, okay, we'd prefer it to face the corridor over a residential development, but if it had to face a residential area, you already have a Class C buffer, B buffer that's required, so you have kind of one of the most stringent buffers in between that commercial use and a residential use, and then on top of that, the zoning administrator could deem, additional buffering, screening, fencing that felt like would be important. So
Would it be based on residents' concerns, or how does the resident come into play?
So it's, I guess, important to, so there are instances, obviously, where you have residential next to commercial. It happens. It's not, we don't, we try to have a gradients of those. So sometimes you have maybe a higher density residential next to commercial. So yes, that could happen and happens as part of the zoning process. But so to your point, no, when someone submits a site plan and staff is reviewing it, it would be kind of at our level to go out, look at the property, look at what surrounds it. Hey, what orientation do we think makes the most sense here? And then because those bay doors may need to face a residential development, what additional screening, distance, what do we think makes the most sense in that regard? So no, it wouldn't be informing or asking the residents.
How does this impact current buildings?
So it doesn't, in the fact that the legal non-conforming use that Alisanne mentioned, if they are facing the corridor now, it could, impede them if they were trying to add on or develop an additional part of their building and they were trying to, have the bay doors face the corridor, if this ordinance isn't amended, but they can operate as they are. But then if this ordinance was amended, I guess there would be flexibility in that you'd have some legal non-conforming uses that are now conforming. And it's just, certainly the desire is kind of to eliminate the visual impact, and staff feels that, maybe the mark was missed and that you really can see it the whole drive of the corridor in some cases. And if we are more concerned about the visual looks of certain buildings, then it would be better handled through design guidelines or design criteria.
So it strikes me that we're talking about sort of two things at once here. The first is the corridors, and the second is the residential, right? Just because that's the way the original text reads.
Yes.
Could we add a specific preference in the text itself for orientation away from residential?
That would be the primary desire?
Yeah, I think that, I'm just trying to sort of address. I agree with Mr. Lee's concern, right? Like, that's the point of the exercise here, is to try to protect those residential uses. And obviously, the screens are great. The problem is the screens start, this tall. And, I mean, I'm not, that's sort of a dramatization, but sometimes it takes a minute for the screens to really be effective. Sometimes the uses are a little more dramatic than we think they're gonna be in terms of volume, vehicle flow, and noise. Just so happens that I grew up in a place where a car wash was sort of the cultural epicenter of my teenage driving years, because that's all there was. And so I can imagine a car wash, particularly a bay car wash like the one that's out by Martin's, getting a lot of, for example, like late night traffic in the immediate vicinity of a residential use where there would be a lot of conflict in terms of noise and things like that.
Yeah, I totally hear. I also want to keep in mind that, so even, so the conflict that could exist between those uses in a residential development could still exist today. The doors would just not face. So I hear that, like, that same use could be there. It would just be turned so the doors were facing away, but it could still potentially be the same noise, the same kind of light impact. And so staff's thought in that regard was you could require something a lot more robust, and hey, you have to plant evergreen trees at a certain height, but then you also have to put in a fence that may, and then sometimes, we're talking about, like, so what if it was a residence that's very close to, but in some cases, it might be a residential development that's significantly set back from that property line, but then we could look at all those things. But yes, it would be, at that point, not an outright restriction, but on the site review team to look at the property and to figure out what orientation would make the most sense to protect the corridor but first, obviously, any residential development.
So in staff's view, this would give you flexibility to add additional protection that you cannot currently add for residential.
Yes, we do feel that way. I mean, certainly there could be properties that exist out there that there's residential somewhere and there's entrance corridor, and so today, no car wash or vehicle sales or service could locate on it under the current ordinance. But staff feels like in those cases, it's just completely, there's just no ability. And what benefit are we actually providing in the orientation, and how can we provide potentially a greater benefit with this flexibility?
Is there a way to encompass the flexibility that would be granted through this versus having to change the whole text to include orientation?
I mean, there's certainly a number of ways, we could go about it. I mean, if you felt very uncomfortable about the residential, it could be, kind of walked back in some ways, and leave that as is and just focus on, the entrance corridor. So certainly if you feel like, we obviously have the applicant and open and close the public hearing, but, staff would be happy to, if you all would like to table it, to continue to look at different ways that might make more sense.
I think the verbiage is sufficient, because I thought I saw on there, Allison, now correct me, that this is a case-by-case review, correct?
Yes, each development plan
So
would have its own
that
review.
in itself gives you the flexibility for the subject property to determine the best orientation and barriers that we already have in place to fit whatever is going in there into that subject property. I don't know how changing the verbiage would give you more flexibility.
I think what it does is, if you change the text, it allows a site team to stipulate changes or whatever it needs to do. My concern is it takes out the resident completely.
Well, but the resident's not, under the current process, the resident's not gonna get an opportunity.
Because you can't do it. Under the
Well-
current text, you can't do it under the current text. It cannot face residential under the current text, am I correct?
Yes, under the current text, it
Change the
cannot
text,
face
it takes
residential.
the resident out of the equation.
It takes the consideration of the resident. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But there's no opportunity either way. It's not like we can position this so there's a public hearing, I guess, but that's not what you're saying.
Right.
Okay, all right, I just wanna make sure I understand what you're saying. Okay. All right, let's hear from the applicant and, have a public hearing, and then we can talk amongst ourselves a little bit more about this. I'd like to hear about the specific application in this case. Unless that, I don't think we would accept some resolution.
Unless Ms. Keller has a question.
If now's the time to add to the text, specific design standards, aesthetic value. You and I had talked about that earlier. So I know that these are decided at the time, right, of application, but do we want to add aesthetic value or specific design standards to that text as well at this time, or is that just a case-by-case review?
I think that the aesthetic guidelines, if that's something that the planning commission and then ultimately council would want to pursue, is something that is kind of a larger lift in terms of like colors, materials, parking orientation. So it's not something we could do now.
Right.
But yes, I think that if that is a desire of the planning commission, that's something that your staff look into. And certainly as we work through our comprehensive planning process might come up from citizens, and then that might be a policy that gets put into that plan potentially, that then we could go down that road in the future. But I think just my experience in entrance corridor overlay district ordinances, there is just so many specifics to them, that it's not something we would be able to try and do quickly with this specific request.
Let me ask one follow-up question about that. So we do not, at least as I understand it, have the authority to dictate design standards based on individual uses, is that correct? So we could not say, if you want to build a car wash, it has to be this material, and, right, it would have to
Yeah,
be
I
for the
think-
entire overlay district.
Yeah,
Is that
throughout the
correct?
entire entrance corridor, roof pitches are this,
Right,
materials
right,
are this,
right.
yes.
So we can't dictate based on, we can't say this is what car dealerships and this is what
Sure.
quick lube
Yes. Mm-hmm.
places, and, right, it would have to be for the entire district.
Yes.
All right, I just want to make sure I understood that correctly. Okay, any other questions for staff? All right, thank you. All right, next, I think we're going to hear from the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Seth Roderick. I'm with Monteverde Engineering and Design Studio located in Harrisburg. I think Allison did a great, really thorough job of kind of showing some of the issues. I'll summarize it just a little differently, but that is that, as an engineer, I've had the luxury, if you want to call it that, of working in a lot of different localities over my career. And that means a lot of different ordinances. We've read through, I'd hate to count. The one thing they all have in common is that they're all intended to protect the public benefit. Different authors have different impressions and different interpretations on how to best do that. And sometimes what feels like a good way to serve the public, and in this case, orienting the bay doors away from protected corridors, turns out to have a negative effect, right? We saw some of those photos that when you're on a, especially a high-speed corridor, and all of the protected corridors, it's kind of interesting, they are very vehicular oriented, right? They're not really heavy pedestrian corridors. And if I'm in a pedestrian corridor, I would probably want to make sure that my bay door is not facing that corridor. But if I'm in a vehicular corridor, you get much more visualization from the path of travel, which kind of forces, when you're rotating that building away from the corridor to have the bay doors tilt towards you, you're facing that line of traffic. So it really does have that opposite effect, which is not the intention, but it's just something you don't really see until sometimes it gets practiced, right? So I think we've all been there. We've all written things and we felt that it was in the best option, and then we realized after the fact that it had a little bit of a negative impact. So we've been working with staff on trying to find a way to best address that without necessarily introducing any additional, unintended consequences. And so this is the language that has been put together. And the one thing that I'll say is that you do have to have some trust in the site review team that's going to be making these decisions. I think the way the language is worded, with residential coming first and the corridors being second, kind of implies that hierarchical, protection. If there was to be an amendment, you could really outline it and say primarily, the least visual impact on primarily residential units or uses and secondarily corridors. But that sounds maybe a little bit cumbersome as well. Or, you could find some other way to kind of do that. But I think that the language, the way it's written, really kind of forces that through. And again, if you have trust in your site review team, those residences are going to be protected, right? That's their whole intent of the rest of the language that's in the ordinance really kind of focuses on that. So I think that you do have protection without necessarily having to add a bunch of additional language on here, because this is not, doesn't exist in a bubble. The whole rest of the ordinance that really outlines those goals for protection exists with this language. So with that said, I know that there was some questions about the specifics of, the intended use that we came forward with, and I'll explain some of that, but I do want to kind of always want to preface and say, as a reminder, this is not limited to the request in front of us. This is citywide, so we don't want to focus too heavily on that. But the question came up, so I want to kind of just touch on it real quick. So it was referenced that the project's located at Waynesboro Marketplace on Rosser Avenue. The specific lot is the one that's directly behind Sheets. Okay, so not on the frontage, but on that second row. Now, to the north, you do have some apartments being, I know they're in design, I'm not sure what the construction schedule is on there. And so that lot, you can't orient the bay doors in either direction because it's either facing a corridor, even though it's second row, or the residential. What our goal is to orient them towards Sheets, second row. I mean, we have no interest in pushing bay doors towards a residential neighborhood, right? And so, but because that corridor width extends beyond just the front row commercial, it extends into that second row. That second row also is held to the same standard of not facing towards either one. So what our goal is to have that and push the building, the layout that we've developed pushes the building furthest away from the residential use, orients the bay doors towards Sheets, which should not be offensive to anybody. We're neighbors with Sheets in other locations, so they're not offended by it. And then in talking to staff, if they have the ability to, through this language amendment, they would require an additional fence along that vegetative buffer. So in addition to the automatic vegetative buffer, which is a mixture of deciduous and evergreen trees and shrubs, and it's some width there to kind of provide that year-long screening, there's also an actual fence, and that's not to protect it from the bay doors, but it's an opportunity to protect it from the headlights. So as people park, as they vacuum their car or whatever, there's additional screening, and that doesn't exist in today's ordinance. So, the real world application of this text, we already had some, initial discussions on what that would look like. And so, so you guys can kind of see and hear how that would be applied. That's how it's being looked at on its first application. Yeah.
So for your specific perspective use, if the ordinance read, all service bay doors shall face away from adjacent residential uses, period, and then said orientation shall face the direction having the least visual impact on corridors, could you orient your use where it faced the corridor but did not face the residential use?
And that's our intention, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I think that in just hearing that language, and I know that that's not written down, so it's kind of hard to see, but the potential issue there is that, does that potentially open it up, even if it's not directly adjacent to a residence? If it was one door over and they're trying to protect a corridor, it could potentially still face the residential neighborhood, which may be closer than the actual corridor. And so that's where I think that, that anytime we get into really rigid language, you're going to find scenarios like what we're seeing with the instances and case studies that Allison put on on the screen, which is that there's going to be some applications where it's like, it doesn't benefit anybody. And I think that where this adds a level of subjectivity, it actually, but because it's a panel and not a single person's arbitrary decisions, which I think all of us would rather avoid, it does allow for some subjectivity to kind of really understand each individual lot and its configuration and what are the barriers in between it and residential uses and the corridors, and have that best applied, again, with all the other language that's in the ordinance to best protect those that need it. And to Mr. Lee's, point, I think all of us see that residential being primary in that effort.
We have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we are now going to open the public hearing for amendments to City Code Chapter 98, Zoning Ordinance, Article 4.410, Vehicle Sales and Service, Article 4.6.7, Car Washes, to change the orientation requirement for service bay doors open. Service bay doors openings. The public hearing is now open. Do we have anyone signed up to speak?
We do not.
Okay, is there anybody who did not sign up who would like to speak on this issue? All right, hearing none, I am going to close the public hearing previously aforementioned. We have further discussion amongst ourselves.
I'd like to make a comment. This refers to the least visual impact on residential. I'm not as worried about that as far as the noise impact. For example, like if you have a tire place, you have the impact hammers removing the wheels and the quick release of air. That can be very noisy. If those bay doors are facing a residential, I could see that being an issue there, but that's the only thing that I could see being a problem. So I would think the team would try to, if it is some type of operation that would be, noisy impact hammers and, that kind of thing, that they would really try to steer away from having the openings facing the residential. So could we add to that at least visual and noise impact? Just as an idea.
Was there noise impacts or times in the original ordinance, I thought?
Yeah, so I think, we're only touching one very small piece of the ordinance. There's a noise ordinance, and there's obviously zoning that puts certain uses, that can't be adjacent to other uses, and some that require a special use permit, like vehicle sales and service requires a special use permit in some districts, whereas by right in commercial. So I just want to keep in mind kind of all those pieces. The reason staff used visual is because I guess maybe wrongly thinking like the orientation of the doors was more of a visual impact, but certainly your site review team is looking at mitigating all impacts to the extent that we feel like, we have teeth within our ordinance to do so. So definitely looking at, where are the vacuums placed, where are the bay doors, where are where are kind of, like a lot of car washes have kind of vacuum areas that are separate, and so our ordinance doesn't say anything about where they can locate. So we felt like the doors were, the way our current ordinance identified them was intending to fix a visual problem. Because, we don't have any requirement about where the vacuums at a car wash face. They can face they can be on the residential side. So no ordinance is perfect, but we felt like this was a way of hoping to get that like case-by-case review, looking at the topography, how it sets, screening. Maybe it's facing toward residential, but maybe that residential is, 3 parcels away. I don't know, some of those things get tricky in an ordinance, but.
How would this, and maybe this is a question for the applicant, with this being behind the sheets, which would then be adjacent to the Texas Roadhouse, how is that traffic impact projected to have an effect on the surrounding areas?
So I'll just, I guess, point out that the property is zoned for business development. The marketplace, that entire development did a traffic impact analysis that covers kind of the full range of build out and maximum build out that could exist. And so that has already been evaluated and looked at. I don't know if they have any specific numbers on this use, but I know that their traffic impact analysis would have definitely factored in a higher generating traffic use than this, because we kind of require them to look at that maximum number.
Yeah, and I think that was a part of when I may be totally misremembering this, when we changed part of that development from residential back to commercial, right? Didn't we look at the traffic on that as a part of that process?
Yeah, I think kind of looking at that previous traffic impact analysis to say, hey, this is what they did all this to factor in,
Yeah.
and then now if we're tinkering with it, it's still captured within that original study.
Yeah. So I think the question is, do we have significant reservations about the current proposed text and it allowing orientation, leaving that issue of whether or not to allow orientation towards adjacent residential uses, or any residential uses? Are we comfortable with that, leaving that decision in the hands of the site review team? Or do we feel like we need to tinker with the language of this so that it creates a higher degree of preference for orientation away from residential uses? I am inclined to leave this in the hands of a site review team, though I understand why other folks might not be comfortable doing so. And rather than just say no to this outright, I would much rather give staff an opportunity to create that preference and create the flexibility. Because again, I think what we have here is two separate issues. We have the issue of impact, potentially conflicting uses, or lawful uses of residential and commercial that may create impacts one between the other. And then we have the issue of orientation and visual appeal along the corridors. And I think we could probably address the corridor. It strikes me that the corridor part is not necessarily particularly controversial. The residential part, I think, is what we're all concerned about. So the question, I think, is, are we prepared to vote on this? And is there a motion to adopt this as written, or would someone like to tender a motion to ask staff to investigate more language that would create a preference for minimizing the impact on residential? Does that make sense? Or have I totally talked myself in a circle?
I mean, I would have more reservations if it was somewhere other than the marketplace, because the car wash isn't gonna have any more impact on Brandon Ladd Apartments and the new apartments than the Sheets, the Texas Roadhouse, and the car wash across the street in front of Martin's already had.
Well, but remember, though, that while this impact may not trouble us, it's
Yeah.
the next impact
But-
down the road
Yeah,
that we.
I think it's important, and to what you just said, Will, it's very important that this ordinance affects the city.
Yeah.
So me, in my position as an elected official, I have to look at what's best for the city. So I have reservations on the impact that this may have on the city, not just the marketplace. So that's my position.
All right, so it sounds to me like we need a motion to ask staff to carry this over to another meeting and ask staff to propose language that has some higher degree of deference or some protection, thank you, higher degree of protection for residential uses. So, let me ask staff this question. Do you want us to, you probably don't want us to vote piecemeal on, you want me to take all the residential stuff out and we can just vote on the corridor thing, or do we want to polish up this existing? And I can just back of the napkin the language real quick, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess either way, it's a recommendation to council, so then we would be taking it to council in multiple parts. I mean, I guess my thought would be, just have us bring it back to you kind of as a comprehensive thing, at a future meeting, if that's what you'd like to see.
And will that, are we gonna, because it's gonna be an additional text changes to the proposal, is that gonna require another public hearing?
Well, likely, I mean, I guess it depends on how material they are when we get into it, but, likely just for the sake, just to keep things obviously open to the public, we'll probably hold another public hearing, yeah.
Right, because obviously, we've got somebody who wants to build a business in the city, and so I'd like to address this quickly if we can.
Sure.
So,
Now,
recognizing that we only meet once a month.
if we put more restrictive language in there, are we taking away the authority of the site review to be flexible in their evaluation of the site?
Yeah, I mean, right now, the site review team is limited in when somebody comes in to do a development, we're looking at, okay, you can't face it that way, and you can't face it that way. The ordinance, you can't. So that's the way the ordinance is currently. We obviously have control and opinions on other specifics in a site plan. This language was a desire to try and mitigate visual impacts, not only to the corridor, but to residences, but through discretion of the site review team. And it sounds like there's still, some desire to have a more formalized, clearer protection against residential properties. And I don't know, we'll have to think through whether that's a certain distance away, whether, we'll have to think through that in a little bit more, it sounds like, if that's the will.
All right, so
I'm ready to make a motion.
do we have a motion?
I move that we table this to our next scheduled meeting and allow for staff to make the proper recommendations and details surrounding the impact to real estate and residential neighborhoods.
Second. All right. Does staff feel like that motion gives them the right set of things to think about, specifically based on the feedback that we've given today?
Yeah, I think we could come up with some options, some different options, whether that be removing the residential altogether, that could be one option. One could be focusing potentially on second tier, defining what facing residential means, because that is a little open-ended. So maybe we need to do a little bit of work in kind of specifying what that means, and then also maybe clarifying separately what a first tier entrance corridor property as opposed to a second tier, although it doesn't sound like the entrance corridor is of much concern. But I think kind of clarifying what that means to face residential could be something that we could look at.
Let me ask before we vote on this, because I want to make sure we got a clear motion. Does anybody feel like they need staff to look at or think about the entrance corridor component of this, or is it just the residential part that we're concerned about?
I think it's just the residential.
Just the I just want to make sure
Okay.
that you guys are
Sure.
equipped with the right.
Yeah, I think
All right.
that's
So with that,
Second.
we have a motion from Mr. Stewart, seconded by Mr. Lee. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. The matter will be set over to the next regular planning commission meeting. All right, we've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. Does anybody want to take a 5-minute break, or are we going to keep marching through?
Let's keep marching.
All right. Next on the agenda, we have the public hearing, preliminary major subdivision plat request by D.R. Horton, agent for District Spring Farm LLC, owner for 180 lot residential subdivision on 28.396 acres located at 0 Duke Road, Waynesboro, Virginia, portion of tax map number 16-1-B, also known as Hopeman Ridge, part of the Smith Farm PUD. Take it away.
Thank you. Okay, so this preliminary plat, preliminary major subdivision plat is located at the Smith Farm PUD. It's actually located right behind the Parkway Village and Summit Towns. Summit Town subdivision, Parkway Village, it's this area located directly behind there. It encompasses about 28.396 acres. It's a portion of the overall Smith Farm property, which is 147 acres. So this is a preliminary, major subdivision preliminary plat request. This is for specifically the Hopeman Ridge development area, part of the Smith Farm PUD. It is by right with no waivers, which means there's no city discretion to deny as long as the applicant satisfies the requirements of the ordinance. In this case, you have the zoning and subdivision ordinances, but also that code of development that was approved with the rezoning late last year. So just to refresh our memory, this is the concept plan for the Smith Farm PUD, and the preliminary plat tonight is for this development area right here, Hopeman Ridge. It is for 180 townhouse units, and it does follow the concept plan that was shown in that code of development. It will be built in 2 phases. Phase 1 will include half the units, 90 units, 3 of the parking areas, and most of the amenities that are included in this section of the PUD. And also the turn lane improvements on Hopeman Parkway that are required. Phase 2 will include the remaining 90 units, the remaining parking areas, and the open green area. Here is a look at the overall layout. The sort of pink color is phase 1, and then the blue color is phase 2. It's a better look at the overall layout of the development. So this is zoned PUD, planned unit development. The code of development had a maximum of 180 units in this Hopeman Ridge development area, and the plat does show that 180 units, or 180 lots. Zoning ordinance requires a 2,000 square foot lot size minimum for townhouse units, and all lots shown on the plat do meet this requirement, ranging from 2,000 square feet to 6,400 square feet. The comp plan does designate this as low-density residential. This development, the overall PUD, did cluster developments in specific development areas with a 400-unit cap on the overall unit number for that PUD, which averages out to about 2.75 units per acre across the entire property. And the properties also include, so by clustering those developments, it protected the more sensitive environmental areas, and also include, of course, that acreage that will be eventually donated as a park. And staff does feel that this complies with the comprehensive plan. So the code of development required certain open space, improved open space amenities be provided with each development area. The code of development required a mix of community trails, picnic area, playground, green, and then the Greenway Trail as part of the Hopeman Ridge development area, and the preliminary plat does show these amenities. This plat does include about a little over a half mile of that Greenway Trail will be constructed with this part of the development, and it does meet the code of development's requirements. And these are the community trails in yellow, which are actually kind of hard to see. You have the playground and picnic area right there, and then you have the open green area here, and then that Greenway Trail that spreads across the back of the property here. As far as street design goes, there will be 52-foot public rights-of-way provided throughout the development, which means the streets will be about 27 feet wide curb to curb, 22-foot wide travel lanes. There will be no on-street parking permitted within the development, and that's due to the fire department's requirements of that 20-foot through lane. 5-foot sidewalks, along with 6-foot buffer strips, are provided along each side of the streets, and then also street trees. And this is a quick look at that typical road section, showing those elements. As far as parking is concerned, townhouse developments do require 2.5 spaces per unit. This is 180 units, so it would require 450 spaces. 2 spaces will be provided by the single-car garage and driveway, which is about 360 spaces, and the remaining 90 spaces required will be spread out in parking areas throughout the development, circled in green here. Access to the development will be through the Summit Town subdivision at Carmen and Telford Drives. An additional point of access will eventually be provided through the Westfield development area, which will then eventually connect out to the Ivy Commons subdivision. And so there's that connection to the Summit Town subdivision to the south. Turn lane Turn lane warrant analyses were conducted during the Smith Farm PUD rezoning process, and those analyses identified that left turn lanes would be warranted on Hopeman Parkway. Those improvements would be triggered by development of the Hopeman Ridge area, and those left turn lanes would be at Bridge Avenue and then also at that entrance to the Food Lion. And phase one of the development does include these turn lane improvements. It's actually kind of hard to see, but up here shows that left turn lane at Bridge Avenue. There's a right turn taper here to go into Carmen Drive, the Summit Towns. It's that area down here. And then up a little farther, the Food Lion entrance, you have the left turn lanes and the Food Lion into the development at Carmen here, and then a right turn taper. As far as utilities are concerned, public water and sewer will be available to serve this site. The applicants did submit the hydraulic analysis that was reviewed by Public Works to ensure that the demand could be met for this particular development. There will be 3 stormwater management areas in the development. One on the, is at the east side of the property, and then 2 on the western side of the property. And final overall configuration of the utilities and then also the stormwater will be reviewed and approved during the next step in the process, which is that public improvement plan review phase. It is in the William Perry School District, so it is likely to cause an increase of students for the William Perry Elementary School and also our middle and high schools. And at this point, there isn't concerns about capacity, although, as we heard tonight, the high school does have more concern in that regard. The standards of the ordinances do appear to have been met, and that includes the zoning and subdivision ordinances, and then also that approved code of development. And staff is therefore recommending approval. The applicants are here tonight to answer any questions, and then I'm happy to take any.
I have one question about the staff report. It looks like that the excerpt, the picture of the Food Lion entrance, Telford Drive, didn't we ask them to, and they moved that so that it aligned with that?
Yes.
Okay, so
And
in the
it-
picture in the staff report, it looks like it's not. Maybe it's just me. It looks like it's not quite aligned. But your picture there, it appears to be aligned. So maybe it's just. But that is aligned now.
That should be
entrance is now
aligned.
aligned with the That's the one right that was off by a little, and we asked them to, and they okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll ask the applicant the other question. Do we have any other questions for staff?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now hear from the applicant.
Hi, I'm Logan O'Day. I'm a project manager at Timmons Group here representing the applicant. Happy to field any questions. I think Allison did a great job presenting the development. Like she said, 180 townhome units as part of the approved PUD. Somebody did a very good job putting together the concept plan and the PUD because we were able to comply with it very, very well. It was well thought out. There's a lot of additional parts of this PUD that make it exciting. The 0.62 miles of Greenway Trail that she spoke about. There was a stream restoration project kind of through the middle of the PUD that's already been conducted and preserved. There'll be parkland dedicated as part of the PUD, so we're really excited to see this come to life. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I just have 2 quick ones. It looks like can we go back to the Timmons overall drawing? Sorry, yeah. So the original site plan that was part of the PUD showed the road at the very far right as having 90-degree right-hand turns, and now it looks like those are T intersections. Is there an anticipated additional interparcel connection down there somewhere, or is that just to get parking? I'm just curious why that changed.
No, I think the T intersections just make more sense in that case. When you have roads that are that far apart, trying to get the appropriate radius for a Waynesboro or VDOT standard road can be difficult. So having them be T intersections kind of eliminates that need, makes the traffic stop and then begin to turn rather than, going full speed around a super tight turn like that.
So instead of, and maybe it was just that the original drawing didn't account for, and it may not have accounted for spacing. but those are gonna be traffic controlled T intersections with a stop sign, right?
That's correct.
All right, that was my only question. I just noticed that change from the original
Thank you.
plan. Anybody else have any questions for the applicant? Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We're now going to open the public hearing on the preliminary major subdivision plat request by D.R. Horton, agent for District Spring Farm LLC, owner for 180 lot residential subdivision on 28.396 acres located at 0 Duke Road, Waynesboro, Virginia, portion of tax map number 16-1-B, also known as Hopeman Ridge, part of the Smith Farm PUD. The public hearing is now open. Do you have anybody signed up to speak?
We do have one signed up, Lydia Peterson.
Ms. Peterson?
Yes, hello, everybody. I've spoken to you before, and here I am again. I continue to have grave reservations about this development, as, you know, you wouldn't be surprised, since I live right across the street from it. Continue to be very concerned about the amount of traffic that will be increased, and I want to clarify a couple things, because I can't really see this. And of course, none of this has been shared with any of the residents nearby. Where is Duke Road on this?
It's off to the far right.
Where? This?
No.
Not part of this plan, nor will it connect to Duke
Why
Road.
is it called 1380 Duke Road?
Yeah, I believe that's just the address of the entire parcel. So if you want to go back maybe we can go back to the map and you can see this is that portion there. So Duke Road is that kind of circular that's up on that end, yes.
Right, okay. So the district home is not part of all of this, correct?
It's not part of this specific preliminary plat, no ma'am.
So we're not taking down the district home, which is the main thing
No, no,
we want to done.
yeah, no, so this is for just that Hopeman Ridge section. This larger planned unit development is still approved under the zoning, and they will be able to come back with future preliminary plats. But yes, the district home as part of the code of development is planned to be taken down, but it's not with this specific area that we're reviewing this evening.
Correct me if I'm wrong, before they proceed to a certain phase,
Sure, yes.
they have to,
yes.
so they can build and construct a certain number, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but
Yes.
I want to try and make sure we answer this question. They can construct a certain number of units, but before we'll issue any occupancy permits for unit number, let's just say, this is not the number, 100, they can build 1 through 100. But after 101, we won't issue them the occupancy permit until the district home is taken down. Is that something along those?
Yeah, so the information about the district home is that the district home will be demolished and properly disposed of within 90 calendar days of site plan or subdivision plat approval for the streamside development area. So that is over, yes. So we're reviewing a different area this evening.
Now, the concern about traffic and everything is, you know, the same, no matter what. We've seen all of this development increase, and all of this, of course, now we even have a sinkhole in the middle of the road here. But all of this traffic, this is a terrible intersection here, if I'm reading that correctly. I don't know which it is. With a hazardous, pullout, we have another hazardous bridge on Duke Road or on,
Rockfish.
Rockfish. You know, all of this, and now we're gonna have another 180 units. And it just, you know, it just seems as though this is going, it's not what was in the original, vision for this property. And I also have continuing concerns about, you know, talk about visual design. Now, how tall are these townhouses gonna be? Yeah, are they gonna be 3-story? I don't know if anybody else drives down this road as often as I do. But, you know, we have now all of these huge 3-story townhouses that we can't see the mountains anymore. You know, they're just totally obliterating. I don't know. You've heard the neighbors express their concerns before, and, you know, you've chosen not to take that into account. And so there's probably little that we can do at this point, other than to continue to express our concerns that this is not the direction that this area should be going in. This was supposed to be a park. It was supposed to be for the good of everybody in the area. And instead, we've got more commercial development, more townhouses, more growth, more traffic. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else signed up?
We do not.
Do we have anybody else here who wishes to speak at the public hearing? All right. With that, I'm going to close the aforementioned public hearing in this matter. Do we have any discussion?
No discussion.
All right. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
All right. So we have a. I want to make sure I get this right. Motion to approve the preliminary major subdivision plat. Was just the subject of the public hearing. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. All right, next on the agenda, we have a review of minor subdivisions and final subdivision plats approved since the February 18th, 2025 meeting.
I do not have any of those for you this evening.
Excellent. Next, we have public comment period for items not on the agenda. Do we have anybody here who wants to talk about something that was not on tonight's agenda? Great. Matters from staff.
I guess the only thing that I would like to mention briefly is that we have kicked off our work with our consultant, EPRPC, that'll be running our comprehensive plan. So we've kicked off that work. We're in the very, very early stages of formulating an advisory committee and of doing that work. A lot of public outreach and surveys and public meetings will happen kind of on the front end of that. So as we get more formalized schedules, we'll be bringing all of that to you.
Is that Mr.
Will Cockrell's firm
Yes.
is doing
okay.
it, yes.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, correspondence and communication.
Only thing I would like to say is that this is the first of the Duke Farm that we're gonna be reviewing. There seems to be a lot of confusion in the community that this is by right. And I don't know what's the best approach to educate the public.
Well, just briefly, there is a bill going through the state assembly that, if signed by the governor, would remove the public hearing platting process that we bring to you. It would remove it from your hands, and we would have to amend our ordinance to take that away. So I think that would certainly clear up some of the confusion when they hear like, oh, there's is something changing? Because we did get calls about that and tried to clarify that, no, it's not a change. They're doing everything per the approved plan. It's just that next step. So likely in the near future, we won't be bringing plats to you. Your rezoning decisions would be where it ends, and then your staff would look at these plans and approve them administratively.
Yeah, and without relitigating this entire issue, there are some people that are never going to be happy with us no matter what we do. And, and I appreciate their perspective, and I'm glad they keep showing up. But this was a by right.
Yeah.
You're right. And and that's kind of the beginning and the end of it, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I mean.
I don't have any commissioners correspondence.
All right, do we have a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all.